Hello, today I'm going to be showing you this portrait of a white horse done in charcoal, and yes, you can use charcoal to draw a white horse. But a few videos ago I promised that I was going to do a black horse series, and some things came up, and this white horse portrait was one of those things, and I just decided that it's better to do it sooner rather than later because it was a commissioned portrait. So I'm going to be talking a little bit about the drawing process. It was a fairly large and complex drawing. I normally do a little bit smaller drawings. So we're going to have a look at the drawing process, and I'm going to be talking about it a little bit. And I hope you'll enjoy it. Now let's get to it. First, a few words about the paper. I'm going to be working on a slightly larger piece of paper than usual. This one is about 11 times 14 inches in size, and this is Strathmore paper. So it's not terribly large, but it's a little bit larger than what I normally work on. As for my tools, I'll be using woodless charcoal pencils, a medium one and a soft one, and some vine charcoal and even some white chalk here and there. But I won't be using the white chalk for highlights or white hairs or anything like that. I'll just be using it for blending. I'll also be using a variety of blending tools, and you can see that I started out by filling in some of the background to the left of the horse, and I'm using whatever I can to blend it in, including my fingers. The important thing here is to blend the background well and to remove the texture to make it smooth and black, because if the black background is challenging enough to draw when you have a white subject like this, because you want to avoid making it look flat. But another challenge is you have to remove all the texture, because if there is any texture left, then this will be competing with the subject in the foreground, so that's a problem I want to avoid. And you can see that I occasionally use a little bit of white chalk for blending as well, to get some of these smoother tones, because not all of it is going to be pitch black. I'm going to be making some portions of it a little bit lighter, as you will see. So I used a variety of blending tools to really spread that charcoal nicely and avoid any graininess or texture. So like I said, I'm trying to make some portions of the background just a little bit lighter, not just to have some variation in the background and make it more interesting, but also for the purposes of contrast, because you see on the top of the head and around the ears there's going to be some highlights, there's going to be some lighter hairs, so I'm going to want a dark background to have enough contrast there. But the snout and the lower part of the horse's face is going to be darker, so I want the background there to be a little bit lighter, so that that lower part of the head stands out against the background and the body of the horse. Now here I started working on the ear, because honestly I found the task of working on the mane a little bit daunting here, so I was kind of procrastinating, and I wanted to start with something simpler. So I started working on that ear, did a little bit of texture, a little bit of hair on it, and shaded the lower portion of it a little bit darker, so that the hairs of the mane stand out more. And the other thing that I did was to draw the eye, which is one of the darkest details on the horse. and I was careful to blend that very softly without using too much pressure, so that I don't push that charcoal into the paper too much, because I'm going to want to draw some highlights on top of it. I'm going to want to draw some hairs, white hairs, which are a part of that mane falling on the horse's forehead. Also a few veins there on the ear, and now I'm using this pencil eraser to draw some highlights to make that top part of the ear a lot lighter, almost white. Now, as you can see, I'm starting to draw the hair, and I'm kind of filling in some of these darker areas, trying to separate these strands or segments to give that hair just a little bit of structure, even though I will be working more on it a little bit later. And I'm spreading that softly with a brush, and then adding a little bit more with vine charcoal on top, because vine charcoal is softer and can be moved and erased more easily. So I'm not afraid to add a little more vine charcoal, that's not a problem. Now, one of the things that you'll notice when you're working on a white subject like this is that at one point it may seem like everything is a little bit too dark. Well, that's because the other parts of the drawing are still not done and they are not shaded in. So some of it may appear too dark, but in reality, once you draw everything and once you pull the highlights, it's actually going to be looking like a white horse. And you can see that I'm also doing the same thing with the face as well. I added a little bit of value even to those lighter parts, because they're not exactly white. There are very, very few areas on the drawing which are going to be almost completely white or very light. Most of it is going to be some kind of mid-tone, slightly lighter or darker here and there. And here I'm trying to remove as much as possible from that upper part of the mane on the top of the head, because that part is going to be lighter than the rest. And I'm using my pencil eraser to draw these hairs, and of course the pencil eraser needs to be sharpened regularly so that it can pull these highlights nicely. And you can see that I'm also going to draw some hairs over the eye as well, to make everything a little more interesting. Now, the thing about drawing white hair on a mane or anything else is that you have to give it structure, you have to give it depth and density. So it's not enough to draw just a few hairs here and there. That's not going to look realistic at all. So what you'll often see me doing is, occasionally, once I draw these hairs, occasionally I'll be going in with a pencil in between the hairs, just a little bit here and there, to create a little bit more depth, to add a few more of these darker areas in between the strands. And another thing that I'll be doing occasionally is just going over it very lightly with a brush, just to knock those highlights back a little bit and subdue the lighter portions just a little bit. And then I go over those again with a pencil eraser to draw new, even lighter highlights on top of the subdued highlights that I went over with a brush. And that makes it look like some hairs are on top of the others, like that mane has some depth and like it has some layers. So it's a process that needs to be done in several stages if you want to make it look realistic and convincing. And you can see that already now that I'm adding some lighter hairs on top of the ones that I did previously. You can see that I'm really getting some depth and complexity in that hair. Now another challenge here is that I'll also need to add the texture to the rest of the head, which means that I'm going to have to be drawing a lot of these small lighter hairs using my charcoal pencil, which has to be very sharp, and I have to use a very small amount of pressure. But the thing is that all of that can be blended in as well. Now another problem with that is that once you start blending it, it's going to add even more value to the subject, and I really need to make it look like a white horse, because the horse in my reference photo was obviously white, so I can't make that too dark. So I'm going over these areas very, very lightly, just adding a little bit of texture, trying to imitate the appearance of the fur. And as always, when you're drawing fur, there are a couple of basic rules that I already talked about in some of my previous videos, and which are more obvious with some of the furrier and hairier animals, but they apply here as well. When you draw these hairs, you have to make sure that you draw them in the proper direction in which they grow, and also you have to keep in mind that the length of the hair varies depending on the body part of the animal. So in some parts of the, even in different parts of the head here, you will see that hair is slightly longer in some parts and shorter, or very, very short, or almost non-existent around the snout. So you have to keep that in mind. And I'm blending everything with a brush. It's not going to remove all of my texture, obviously, it's just going to soften it a little bit and add a little bit more value here and there. I can always go back in with my erasers and take away a little bit of that value, and also draw some highlights, try to pull some lighter hairs in between these darker ones if I can, and pull some highlights in these darker areas or shadow areas, darker portions of the face. Horses are very muscular and veiny and tend to have thin skin through which you can see a lot of those muscles and sinews and veins. So I need to try to capture that look. And I think that's even more conspicuous with a lighter subject like this than it is on a black horse, although that probably depends on the lighting. Started working a little bit on this mane here, but I'm going to leave that for now, and I'm going to have to move on to the rest of the horse's head. I need to do this ear, and I need to do the rest of the head. If my lighting varies, I'm sorry about that, because some of the footage was made with the artificial light, and some of it was done under daylight, so it may seem like sometimes my drawing is getting a little bit darker or lighter. I can't really do anything about that. In the end, you will see what it really looks like. So there's a little bit of shadow around this ear to the left, so I tried to capture that casted shadow, and now I'm adding those veins. I really want to make them stand out, so that needs to be done in a couple of stages as well. So you have to shade the background around them as well, so that they have the lighter part and the darker part. And now I'm drawing the nostrils and the area around the snout and the nose. There's a lighter mark there, as you can see, in the middle between the nostrils, but the thing is that because it's in the shadow, it's on the shadow side, I need to make it darker as well, and yet it mustn't be that dark, because it has to stand out against the rest of that snout. I don't know if I'm using proper terms for the anatomy of the animal, but I think you understand what I mean. And now I need to do more of this texture work. I need to do more of this here, and obviously this is a process that took a little bit of time and patience. Again, this is a slightly longer time lapse, but a time lapse nonetheless. It's narrated, but I didn't want to make a full-length video in real time, because that would take many hours. And I neither have the patience nor enough to talk about for that longer footage. Plus, processing longer videos obviously takes more time, which is the one thing that I'm always short on. Sorry. So there's a few more veins here as well. And the area around the nostril is going to be a lot lighter. I'm going to have to keep that white, even though I can always go back in and just clean up a little bit with an eraser. You can see that I used mostly a pencil eraser here. I didn't use the kneaded eraser that much. I just found the pencil eraser very convenient for drawing these white hairs. Just adding a few spots here and there on the nose. And now I'm adding that hair. Very short strokes and very light too, because I don't want to make them too dark. I need to cover all of it and to leave out that part where the vein is to make it stand out. I'm pretty happy with the portion of the mane on the forehead. That looks pretty good, so I won't be fidgeting with it anymore. Maybe a few shadows here and there, just a few touches here and there, but it's mostly done. Now I'm just mostly going to focus on the face. And just try to draw the fur and give it some nice texture without making it too dark. And then hopefully the background and the rest of the body will be a lot easier. The reason why I think it'll be easier is because not much of it really is visible. You can't make out all of it because the head is kind of popping out from the dark. It's getting more light, and the rest of it is kind of fading into the dark background. So I'm not gonna worry too much about the details on the body. Maybe a few details and muscles on the neck, and that's about it. But the head is what will take most of the time to do. This eye gave me a little bit of trouble because I was kind of struggling to make some parts of it dark enough, because it's almost completely in the shadow and not much detail there is visible, but there are some hairs on top of it, so at one point I had to draw kind of around them or in between them, which I don't like. It would have been easier if I had done the eye or finished it completely and then drew the highlights, but I found myself adding some detail to it a little bit later once some of those strands of hair were already in place, so I had to work around them, which was probably not the best thing to do, but it turned out okay. Another thing that you'll see is that my approach is not really something that more experienced artists would recommend, because normally they go from larger shapes and larger relationships to detail. I did a little bit of that. I did a little bit of blocking in here and there, drawing some of these larger shadows here and there, but I just don't have the patience. Every now and then I move in with some of the detail in certain parts of the body, and then I go back to drawing these larger relationships, and then I move in with the detail. So I like to go back and forth, and I don't really follow any strict rules. I just like to go with the flow and draw what I feel like at the moment, even though, like I said, details can be distracting a little bit. So that's something to avoid, getting caught up too much in the details, because sometimes you can forget about the larger shapes and the relationships between these larger, lighter and darker areas, and I hope that I managed to avoid that problem here, because you can see that there's quite a range of value on the horse's face. And I'm just going to try to do this portion quickly and simplified, because really there's not much detail there. Like I said, the head is kind of popping out from the darkness, and you can't really make out too much detail on the body except a few muscles on the neck, but that's about it. And one of the things that you'll see me doing a lot here is obviously blend with brushes and with everything I can use, but another thing that I also used for blending was white chalk. White chalk or white charcoal can also be used for blending, because sometimes when you have too much texture and too many of these lines are visible, you can just go over them with white chalk, and it softens everything. It kind of helps to blend everything and makes everything smoother and creates nicer mid-tones. So you'd expect that I would use white chalk for drawing these highlights or hairs. I don't really like doing that. I think that for that purpose the eraser is far superior, and it just looks a lot better. I just need to make this lower portion of the drawing a lot darker, so that the head would really stand out against the background. And just a few more details on the mane here, even though I don't want to spend too much time on it, because not much of it is visible in my reference photo either. But I need to make that top area over there a lot lighter. I really want a lot of contrast there, like the light is shining on the top of the head. And now I need to decide where to sign it, and I chose to sign it in this lower left corner. So here it is. This is the finished drawing. I'm just going to move it around a little bit so that you can see all of it or most of it. And I'm going to zoom in a little bit so that you can see more of that detail, more of those hairs and that texture, because it's a pretty large and detailed drawing. I'm going to zoom back out. So there it is. I hope you enjoyed this charcoal drawing of a white horse. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye for now.